Welcome to Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan Peters, psychologist and executive coach. This show is all about bringing hope, connection, awareness, and wisdom through meaningful conversations that inspire us to become better versions of ourselves and make a positive impact on humanity. This is your space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with who you are, what you care about, and who you want to be. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. Today's show is Celebrity, Fame, and Feminism with our esteemed guest, Gina Barreca. Hailed as smart and funny by People, Gina was deemed a feminist humor maven by Ms. She has appeared often as a repeat guest on 2020, The Today Show, CNN, the BBC, NPR, and Oprah to discuss gender, power, politics, and humor. Gina has written for most major publications, including but not limited to the New York Times, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Cosmopolitan, and the Harvard Business Review. Her columns for Psychology Today have over 7.5 million views, and her 2 TEDx talks have thousands of views. Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor at UConn, as well as winner of its highest award for excellence in teaching, Gina has written 10 books, including the bestseller, They Used to Call Me Snow White, But I Drifted. And Gina's latest book, Fast Famous Women, will be released next month. This collection of 75 essays is part of Gina's popular Fast Women series, which include Fast Fallen Women, Fast Funny Women, and Fast Fierce Women. Gina grew up in Brooklyn and Long Island and lives with her husband in Storrs, Connecticut. Gina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Dan.
So good to see you again.
I'm delighted to be here. It's very exciting. It's always a lot of fun, and I look forward to our conversation.
I was listening to our last conversation, and at the very end, you said, well, hopefully we'll get to do this again. And I said, well, given the person that has connected us, our producer, Laura, who both beloved to both of us, I said, I'm quite certain that will happen again. And when we talked, it was you were just releasing your previous Fast Women series, Fast Fallen Women. And here we are with the next one.
And Laura is one of the headliners.
Yes, she is.
In this new book. She and her daughter,
Yes.
in a really fabulous combination, have written about Taylor Swift. And what Laura Rossi and her daughter, Julia Totten, wrote for Fast Famous Women is a wonderful conversation that they have about how it's as if Taylor Swift is part of their family life. Not in some hallucinatory way, but as in that they talk about her lyrics, that they make reference to lines or phrases from songs when just incidental, occurrences happen that remind them both of a line. And what would Taylor do? Remember that line that was what she said about this? This is, you were meant for me. I mean, this is like, that's exactly what this was. I mean, they know the whole canon in a way I don't, but it was just about how, fame becomes for everybody, but again, this book is particularly by women, and thinking of women who have achieved sort of the spotlight and the center stage. What it's like for women who are still often marginalized and perhaps increasingly marginalized in our culture to be able to look at a figure who has mostly unashamedly gotten up there and said, "No, I got the mic. I want the camera. I want you to listen to what I have to say." Because there's still a lot of us who are like going, "Excuse me, I don't know if I got that right. I don't know." Just like, we hesitate, we wonder, we feel like we're overdoing it. And so to look at people as Laura and Julia do, to look at people like Swift, who bring everybody along with her, that there's a sense of confidence by proxy that these figures give us.
And as you wrote, this is a perfect quote for Taylor as a icon, who is faced with this phrase. A woman who is famous is not just celebrated, she's also critiqued, scrutinized, and all too often torn down. Right. And this is and Taylor is amazing. I mean, she is a role model and she stands with integrity. And I mean, I don't, the skin and the armor that must have to be developed over time to be someone like her, and many of the women who are written about in the book, I imagine it is an iterative process, a painful one, and one where I wonder, does one just accept this is a part of the celebrity, a part of the fame, a part of the responsibility in carrying this torch?
I think it's a great question, because it's not only it's certainly it's carrying the torch, but it's lighting the torch for others. It was the
Mm,
old Gloria Steinem line.
mhm,
Gloria Steinem has had so many wonderful questions about her role, in the women's movement. And when she was asked, I think at 60 or 65, if she was going to pass the torch to someone of the next generation, she said, I'm not giving up this torch. She said, I will light the torches of anybody who wants to light,
mm,
but I'm not passing mine along to
mhm,
anybody else. I'm holding on to this one. I earned it, but I will light everybody else's torch from mine. And
mhm,
again, I think that that's it. It's not as if something has to be given up to be passed down.
mhm,
And I feel
mhm.
like that's, from I again, Laura and Julia are the experts on Taylor Swift, but it seems like Swift's parents, her sense of community, her friendships, that she doesn't exist just in the bell jar of fame, that the more tragic versions of women who've been in the public eye or a public space,
Mhm.
in earlier days, perhaps we'd like to think. Sometimes thinking of, I mentioned the bell jar, Sylvia Plath. I mean, one of the essays is on Sylvia Plath and how difficult it was as a young woman, as a young poet, as somebody who was successful, who wrote her classic autobiographical memoir, The Bell Jar, about depression as a young
Mhm.
adult, published it first anonymously, which a lot of people don't realize, and in England. And then when the book did astonishingly well, then came back and published it under her own name in America. But she was wary enough of having to assume that mantle of fame,
Mhm.
and that writing this kind of autobiographical work would diminish or distort her later reputation as a poet.
Mm.
That she didn't want to assume that identity as like the sad or depressed girl who had attempted suicide, at a young age. Um, and of course, her own sort of tragic end is what has sort of stayed pinned to her as an outline for her life.
To your point about, people are expressing feelings more, a word that comes to my mind, which I think was the word of the year maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, was authenticity. It was, like, the most used word, and I know it is used a lot, and I do think it's really important because I think there is a movement for people being more in touch with their authentic selves or trying to become their authentic selves. And with our modern generation and social media, like more and more people are putting themselves out in a raw way, which I think really inspires and motivates others to do the same. We know from great work of Carl Rogers and so many other of the great psychologists and theorists of the time, the more we are aligned with our authentic selves and more we accept who we are, the more inner peace and harmony and like life is just easier when we are aware of it and then we actually act on it. So that's one thought I had. And then the second thought, as you were talking about envy and jealousy, which is talked a lot about, particularly in my readings within um, the female writing and female
Mhm.
work, even though men get just as jealous, but it's
Right,
interesting, it gets written about a lot, and I was thinking of Elise Lunen's book on our best behavior where she took on the 7 deadly sins,
right.
and her twist on it was, you know what? Like you said, this is part of being human, and how about instead of it being a negative thing, it's a trigger for us that, wow, that person has that, that person is doing that, I want that. That could actually be a role model, as opposed to, "Ugh, I've got," I'm less than, and
Right.
Why do they get that and I don't?
We have another friend of our mutual friend, Laura Rossi, Caroline Levitt, who's a New York Times bestselling author.
Yes, I know.
Right,
Yes,
you've had
right.
her, right?
Yes, yes.
And Caroline is just absolutely incredible. And she writes this imaginary interview with Fannie Brice, who was the figure that Funny Girl was
Mm-hmm.
based on,
Mm-hmm.
and was one of the sort of original vaudevillian comics on stage, and was making fun of how she looked, how she wasn't the typical, she was the funny girl, she wasn't the pretty girl. But Caroline Levitt, so she interviews Fannie Brice, and Caroline Levitt, again, you can't imagine this New York Times bestselling, brilliant woman, prolific writer, wonderful person. And she's like, she wants to borrow Fannie Brice's bravado. She wants to borrow her sense of courage. She wants to have more confidence in herself. And you're thinking, or Caroline's essay opens the volume, and thinking like, how could, if Caroline Levitt feels that way,
Mm-hmm.
it's both, it's sort of a revelation, because it's like she feels that way.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, then I'm allowed to feel that way. There's
Yes.
that. But then looking for the reassurance that then she provides from Fannie Brice, basically going, be yourself, kid.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you want. All right, you're a vegetarian, you're not having the pastrami. I'm having the pastrami.
Right.
You
Right.
want to wear lipstick, buy red lipstick, get the lipstick. I mean, she does her own voice, but then she does Bryce's voice brilliantly.
You mentioned Joan Rivers,
Mhm.
so it sparked that that moment. That I have a few famous "Turn It On You" with some fame things. So I can't really do the Joan Rivers accent like you
Oh, I can
can,
do
but
Joan
you do
Rivers.
it. But you will also to set you up. You once opened because you have a comedic life as well, and you once opened for Joan Rivers, who said, "I hate you. You're funnier than I am." But you do it. You do the Joan Rivers. You do the Joan Rivers. Yeah.
This is so I'm opening for, it was a big fundraiser. It was held at the Bushnell Theater in Hartford. So there were, I don't know, 2,500. It was a big crowd because
Mm-hmm.
they're there to see Joan Rivers. But at that point, I was writing a weekly column for the Hartford Courant, including for the Tribune. And I was a familiar face to a lot of the Hartford crowd. And Joan Rivers, who, like the woman I grew up next to in Brooklyn, New York, who's Judge Judy,
Judge Judy, I know,
they can
amazing.
do
Yeah,
the
yeah,
accent. So these are women who are so tiny, they could be in a Happy Meal.
right.
Joan Rivers, this larger than life
Yeah,
figure,
they're larger than life
and
figures.
they're
Yeah.
tiny, wee people. I mean, they were like, 4'8", and they weigh about like 92 pounds, right? And these wonderful features and this presentation. So there was Rivers coming out. So I did my thing about growing up watching her and loving her and being from New York. And she came out in this fabulous sparkling dress, and I'm in some professorial outfit. She was like, I hate you. You're funnier than I am. And she used a unkind word. But that was the most nicest thing anybody had ever said to me, was
That's
like,
respect.
right,
That's
exactly,
respect.
I hate you. And I felt so good. But the nice other thing about that is somebody came up to me after, who had seen Rivers a number of times over the years. And then she said that once she had to park far away, and that Rivers was in the limo, and that Rivers rolled the window down from the limo and said, do you want to lift to your car? And she said, no, I'm not that far. She said, we're going to follow you until you're safe in your car. You shouldn't be walking in a parking lot at night late alone. And I thought, that's a regular broad.
Mhm.
And now,
Mhm.
Rivers was a regular broad. She went to
Yeah.
Barnard, right? I mean,
Mhm.
she was a graduate
Yes.
of Columbia University
Yes.
Women's School. I mean, she was a smart cookie. But she made her way in the toughest
Yes.
business in the
Yeah.
world. But she was working until the day she died on the
Yeah. Yeah.
plastic surgeon's table. I mean, she was
Yeah.
working in Queens. She was
Yeah.
trying out new material in
Mhm.
local clubs. And
Mm.
that's,
Mhm.
for me, that's an idea of success, not always fame. They
Yeah.
don't always go together. There's a big difference. You can
Mhm.
be famous without being successful, and you can be very successful without being famous.
Yes. When so that also makes me think of, you said she went to Barnard, and you in your fame, and it's in this context of being built up and I imagine also being taken down and not knowing whether to be assertive or be docile. You were the first female at Dartmouth University.
Well, I was one of the first 3 classes at Dartmouth College. So they didn't know what they were getting.
They
I
got
had
you.
no idea what I was getting into. So it was like a weird blind date. This was in 1975. And where other people, like from my big public high school on Long Island, Oceanside High School, where, some of them were going to like, college prep places. And I like went to a psychic, to see, for advice on where to go to school. My mother died when I was in high school. My father, wasn't sure what to do. My brother had been in a couple of different colleges and was sort of making his own way. He was older than I was, older than I am. And he just got his PhD. He got his MBA, his JD, and then he finally got his PhD at age 72. I
Wow.
think because he just couldn't stand his kid sister having a degree that
Yeah.
he didn't have. He wasn't going to do anything with it. It was just like, nah.
Yeah.
Talk about it's
Look what
like,
I have.
you got a lollipop?
Yeah,
I'm getting a lollipop.
Yeah. Man, that's a hard fought lollipop right there. Yeah.
It's really.
Yeah.
But, and when I went for the interview, I had no idea what a college interview was. Nobody in my family had gone to college. Nobody, the guidance counselor had like 178 people. I was not getting special attention. And I remember going and I really knew nothing about Dartmouth. And I went for an interview and somebody said, oh, you're supposed to like wear a white shirt and like a plaid skirt. Now, this is 1975. On a good day, I look like Janis Joplin, right? I look like a hooker. I'm wearing skin-tight black jeans. My hair is down to my waist. I have little tiny sunglasses, little sunglasses, round. And so I borrow my boyfriend's white shirt and I get like a tartan plaid jumper skirt from a thrift shop. And I realized, looking back on it now, that I did not look like a co-ed from Love Story. I looked like an extra from Braveheart. I looked like
I was getting a cross between like Joan Jett and Cher.
I wish. Oh, you were too kind. I'll come in every week. No, I did not look. Yeah, I would love to be. Joan Jett would have been I could be any banshee with Susie. No, I looked like I should be painting my face blue and screaming freedom with Mel Gibson at the end of it. It was not a good look. But I got there in 1975 and it was like a 7-to-1 male-female ratio. And I had no idea. And I thought, so the motto for the school, which is painted on an old painting, portrait of Daniel Webster, who was an early graduate of the college with his fist raised in the air and making a plea to keep the place a college and not make it into a university like those other, what would become known as the Ivies.
And there I did. I said university. I made it into a university.
It's like, good. Right. It's not, but it wants to be a college. So there's Webster saying it may be small, but there are those who love it. And apparently in 230 years, I was the first one to say, that's a funny motto for a boys' school. And all of these guys named Chip and Skip and Trace said, what do you mean? And I was like, I'm not explaining this joke to you. Like, if you don't get it, But I also thought this is, my family thought that I was going to college in New Hampshire because I must be pregnant, because that was the only reason any young woman ever left the state. Mm-hmm. So I figured I had 9 months before anybody expected me back. I might as well have a good time. I mean, I was on a scholarship. I was on work study. I had a job. And so I didn't know if I was going to make it, but I was going to enjoy myself. And so I wrote a book about that. That's
you did write a book.
Called Babes in Boyland. And what I learned, that's where I learned how to speak up. I mean, that's where I learned that humor was going to cut through, a lot of fences and gates. It was going to let me climb up. And sort of, I felt like one of the lines I got in Babes in Boyland, it was sort of like breaking into an institution as opposed to breaking out of one. Like I was trying to sneak in to the place and then realized that actually there was a place for me. And then, we've also got another woman named Linda Button, who was one of my comrades in arms at Dartmouth, wrote about a very famous woman, although I was surprised to realize that my students didn't know who she was. But I think most people, let's say over 40 or 50, Lizzie Borden.
I know that was so fascinating to me in the book that you said that basically people don't know.
Right,
We grew up with the song, like the
right.
song, right? So fascinating.
But my students don't, I mean, they got
Right.
all of this true crime stuff that they listen to. And I was like, well, the queen of all that is Lizzie Borden. They're going, who?
Hmm.
And I was like, no, 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 no. You have to know Lizzie Borden. And then I'm thinking that is not actually what the taxpayers of Connecticut are paying me to teach their children is the story of Lizzie Borden, but it's fine. They know who she is, but it's a great,
Hmm.
and the tagline for Linda Button's story is I had plans and I had to execute them.
Exactly. That was a great. That was such a great ending. That was
It's
just such
such a
a
great
great
line.
ending.
And to sort of put it into
Yeah.
corporate speak,
Right.
is
Right.
just absolutely fabulous. So with these, Jane Smiley, isn't it the great Pulitzer Prize winner of 1,000 Acres and, all of these amazing books. I think she starts the book and then Carolina comes after her. But she chooses Jane Lynch, the actor, the one from Glee and from so many different places, because she says, I want you to play me in the movie of my life. And you'd have to play me at 4 different ages with 4 different husbands and all these various children. And so says, like, this is what you'll need to do. But my 4th husband wants to do the filming on his iPhone. And so
Hmm.
it's this very direct letter to,
Hmm.
we could meet at this restaurant. I think you'd like it. And it's brilliant, but it's so much about the different voices.
Hmm.
And so there are Leanne Lord, who's a terrific stand-up comic, talks about getting onto a plane, and she writes a lot about Black history and is about her life growing up as a Black woman in America, and her humor is about that, but it's also about everything. She's just incredibly smart. She's somebody with a doctor, a PhD after her name, but she doesn't use it, but she's everywhere, and she's on a tour of something called Women of a Certain Age, and she writes about being on the plane, getting onto a plane, and Maya Angelou
Right. And my
was
aunt is
right,
is right there. Is
and
right
is
there.
right there, and
Yeah.
it's like 10:30 in the morning, and she's
Yeah.
like, and it's like, oh my God, Maya Angelou has a laptop, and then it's like, oh my God, Maya Angelou orders a Bloody Mary,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now I know why the cage bird sings.
Yeah.
It's
But
just
again, and it normalized for her, right?
right.
Again, another thing it normalized, and I think that's where when you think about the whole fast women, I was gonna say series, but I was gonna say
Yeah. Okay.
movement
Yes, absolutely. I'll take
is
you there.
how what is your vision? What was and is your vision for how to highlight these women? And we'll talk about fast women, right? And
Mhm,
what that means to push forward the complexity of being a woman, not only in this time, but
mhm.
throughout time.
It's different perspectives on how women who have achieved roles where not necessarily, there are parades for them, where not necessarily, everybody would recognize the silhouette of their profile, on a flag, where that's not
They're not all
always
Lucille Ball. We
right,
all know
not all
Lucille Ball.
Lucille Ball,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Um, but people who changed the world, like Shirley Chisholm, people who were politicians, who were the first woman to ever become a librarian,
Mhm. Mhm.
couldn't herself hold a library card.
Mhm.
The laws didn't allow her to do that. And so the stories that you go, whoa, I didn't know that had to happen. I mean, Brenda Murphy, who is a scholar of American drama, decides to write on Jane Fonda,
Mhm.
right? And takes us through the different sort of snapshots Fonda and Fonda during Vietnam when
Mm-hmm.
she had been in Barbarella. Was it Barbarella? What was she in that? She'd been like America's sex pot. It's Henry Fonda's daughter, and she's half naked, and she's in these movies, and becomes this sexualized, of course, creature with all eyes on her. And then she goes to Hanoi and seems to be sympathetic to the Viet Cong. And then there are posters out with "I'm not Fonda, Hanoi Jane," and
Mm-hmm.
but that everything still came down to her haircut.
Mm.
And it's sort of the history of Jane Fonda is sort of the history of different haircuts that she had, which symbolized her changing, her
Mm-hmm.
going, like we grew up, which she's older than most of us, but we sort of grew up watching Jane Fonda. And it was like, yeah, I did that. Then she became Ted Turner's wife. Then she became the workout
I was
person.
going to say someone who grew up in the 70s, I
Yeah,
think of among all of the rest, the leg
right,
warmers, right? The
right. The
leg
leg
warmers,
warmers,
I,
absolutely.
iconic.
Right.
Right, right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So she's doing that. And then she's trying to explain how you can make, sesame noodles out of peanut butter. I mean, there were all of these different versions of her. And again, this is somebody who's no fool. But this
Mm-hmm.
is somebody who you mentioned Cher before. Cher isn't in the book. She should be. But somebody who just changes enough and goes, you don't like it, don't watch.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't like it, it's fine. And that
Mm-hmm.
finally comes down to the idea, and I think that this is true for all the people writing for Fast Women and the essays that are in there, not only for Famous but for the previous books. I wrote for the Signet edition of Machiavelli's The Prince, which is slightly off topic, but not really. I go into the idea of what the definition of power is.
Mm-hmm.
That's another
Mm-hmm.
thing that we like to talk about how power manifests itself, but we don't like to actually sort of define power because that's getting a little too close to the sun,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where it's a little Icarus-y for us, like define power. But their cultural critic named Elizabeth Janeway, I think, gives the best version of it. It's what I have my students write down. It's what I talk about in The Prince. Um, definition of power, as Janeway puts it, is power is the ability not to have to please.
Hmm.
And I also think that that's like the definition of freedom,
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
ability not to have to please. You could say it's the definition
Oh.
of mental health. It's where it's like, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I believe, but power is the ability not to have to please. So that you do what you're skilled at, what you're an expert in. It's like, how do I convince people of something? It's like you have to know it by heart.
Hmm.
You're not selling the idea, you're explaining why this is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to convince anybody of anything. It's like, this is my argument. If you are not convinced by it, you're not convinced by it. But here's the argument, and I know it's a real one.
So is power gender neutral from your
Absolutely,
experience?
no, absolutely not. Because
Right.
women, anybody who has traditionally been sort of deterred, shot for, enslaved if they try to enter the court
Burned.
of power.
Burned.
Burned,
Yeah.
burned.
Yeah.
Yes, burned
Yeah.
is always fun.
Yeah.
Burned is a witch. It's nice. Anybody
Yes.
can be a witch.
Right.
I just taught Margaret Atwood's great poem, Half Hanged Mary, in my class.
Mm.
It's like they try to hang this woman. She lives through the night. And she says, I was not a witch before, but now I am one.
Mm.
It's like, again, I don't have to please anybody now. I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
convince anybody. I
Mm-hmm.
lived through the hanging. Now, you were scared before, just
Right.
wait.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I got nothing. I don't have to be nice to anybody. But people who were barred from being in positions of official power I also wrote a book on revenge. It was translated into many languages. It turns out revenge is the most universal of topics. The
Mm.
German edition, it did well with the Axis powers. The German edition, the Japanese edition is beautiful, that book. And, but that you find ways of getting power if you're denied the legitimate ways of getting power.
Mm.
You will figure
Mhm.
out people who are in, um, again, positions where they are roped off or barred from or gated out of, will find other ways. So that women traditionally have only had to use the powers of the weak, which is a title of one of Jameson's books, The Powers of the Weak. So that traditional female devices of the weeping, of the victim, of pleading, of, oh, I can't do that. And it's a whole other topic, but recently one of my students said, do you know anything about I think it's on TikTok, but the I'm Just a Girl movement? And I was like, no. And she said, it's sort of a parody, but it sort of isn't. We're saying, oh, I can't do that. I'm just a girl. Like no, I can't fill up my own gas tank. I have to go to the princess pumps because I'm just a girl. And I was like, no, this is like the last 75 years. It's like, it's too close to being what some people really think, no, she can't be in a position of authority because she's just a girl. I said, it's not, and no, I said, you gotta clean that one up. That's not going to work. So anyway, going back to your earlier question about the whole fast women idea, that fast is, I'm using as, first of all, because they're all flash fiction. They're all fun size, bite size essays. So most of us, I think, now read, listen, consume our pieces of wisdom in fun-sized, bite-sized pieces. They're sort of small, nourishing portions, right? And so it's fast, as in you can read this fast. I mean, I want everybody to read Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. I reread it regularly. It's still one of the most brilliant books on growing up as a woman. I think every man should read it as well as every woman. It's like, I don't know, 650 pages. It's hard to do between stops on the subway. You can read 2 essays because your trip on the bus is always going to be longer than 1 essay. You can read it while you're waiting to do something. You can read it online. You can listen to it. Let's hope it comes out in an audiobook. You can listen to it. You can, there are ways of making a connection with one of these pieces in a very short space. So it's fast that way, in that they're brief. They're all under 750 words. So that's a part of it. But fast is also, it's like you have to make decisions. It's like you have to get to the point. These are, I always say, that any good piece of writing, any good conversation is going to hold up a mirror to your soul. And this holds up a compact mirror. It's a small vision of your soul, but it's right there. It'll still give you a picture. It's just in a small frame.
When I now having have read 2 of the 4, Fast Fallen and now Fast Famous, I think of I don't know if it's the play on the word fast or what I've thought of like a fast woman, of showing the complexity of womanhood. I mean, of human, and then this very important subtype of human, female, and on the one hand, needing to be graceful, pleasing, say all the right things, do all the right things, and on the other side, being a raw, authentic, fallible person that has good judgment, sometimes might lack judgment other times, just like all of us, and showing like all sides of this raw, real human.
Right? No, that's a great way of saying it. And it's also, it's like, for years, certainly when I was growing up, I mean, it was the idea of you're just like a woman. I learned how to say only when I was in my 40s, like, thanks. You mean like I'm smart, insightful, compassionate, decisive, creative? That's terrific. You're just like a woman too, mister. It's the nicest thing you can say about somebody. But just like a woman, used to be the old refrain of every sort of folksy song. She breaks just like a woman. She aches, but inside she's just like a little girl. No, actually, she's just like Amelia Earhart, but we found her.
Right.
She's
Right.
just like Janet Yellen, who will keep the world together. She's just like all of these. She's like Cleopatra. She's like Elizabeth Taylor. She's like Taylor Swift. She's like these other women that we're looking at who will show us how they did it,
Hmm.
and who will inspire us and reassure us, and whose courage and intelligence and insight we can borrow.
Hmm.
When we're
Hmm.
feeling a little short on our
Right.
own,
Yes.
we can borrow theirs. There's enough
Hmm.
to go around.
Hmm. One of your authors, Patricia Wynne Brown, she
Hmm.
writes about Patti LaBelle, and she quotes. There's a quote from Patti LaBelle from Patti's autobiography that reminds me of you. And here is Patti's quote: "When you inspire someone to reach into themselves, to reach their potential, they can't help but pass that inspiration to so many others. It makes you immortal."
Oh, isn't that nice? Thank you. And
This is the
Patty,
torch. This
yeah,
is the
that's a
like you
choice.
said, not passing the torch, lighting for so many, which you have done for hundreds upon thousands of individuals in your career.
Thank you. I accept the gift of those generous words. I really do. And I will, and you do the same. And we're lucky to be able to, have somebody pay a little bit of attention.
Mhm,
And the best thing that any of us can say is that, what I heard, there was somebody was talking about this topic today, and then they go on and start their own conversation.
mhm,
And that's got to make the world brighter.
mhm.
It's illumination. And if
Yes.
we sometimes we'll see things that we're going, oh, I didn't know that was there, I have to
Mhm,
clean that part up. But
mhm.
for the most part, it's got to be better. It's got
Well,
to be better.
one of your, special talents, or, shall I say superpowers in talking about a lot of very difficult stuff is the humor, right? With the humor which we touched on, or not touched, we talked a lot about in the last conversation. I wanna bring that in because I think it's critical to, well, to living, right? It's
Mhm.
critical to coping. When I was listening to our last conversation, I was talking about how there was a lot of difficult stuff going on a little over a year ago, and well, guess what? There's still a lot of difficult stuff going on. You talk about humor as alchemy, transformative, and redemptive.
Right.
And tell us about how to use that in the context of furthering the advancement of womanhood, of equal rights, of equal respect, right? Like kind of the cornerstone of everything that your books, these books and beyond are about.
It's one of those things where I feel like I don't have to sell the idea. We know that humor does that. Humor is light. There's an old line from G.K. Chesterton that says that angels fly because they take themselves lightly. Such a nice idea. But
Hmm.
it's about taking yourself seriously, but sometimes taking moments or the world lightly. It's about switching perspectives. It's about, again, different lenses, so that humor depends on seeing something within a larger context, and that's why it is redemptive. That humor allows you, once you can make something into a story, you can embrace it, you can hold it, you can understand it, you can see it at arm's length. um, I did some work in the archives of the Irma Bombeck papers out at the University of Dayton. I gave their opening talk when they opened the Bombeck archives. It was really a treat. And one of the things that Bombeck wrote down, and I think it was like on the back of a dry cleaning receipt, I mean, these were real archives. She wrote, after something terrible happens, you want to get to the point where you're saying, is it humor yet? And I thought that was such a great, is it humor yet? Like, is it funny? You know, are we at the point? And it was always journalists, physicians, ER nurses, the people who were in the trenches, soldiers, that came up with the most horrible humor, because they had to deal with the immediacy of any tragedy, any crisis, any panic. So they came up with the word. I mean, and this is before the web. This is where they're saying this stuff to each other, where war correspondents, or Ernie Pyle is writing this down. And that's their way of coping. So it's like, we just have to get through this. So we're going to make fun of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put this, because this allows us to blinker this vision, and then we can process it later, right? We're not going to think about this now. We'll think about it later and get through it. But humor is a big survival mechanism. And even if it doesn't help you survive longer, it helps you survive better. Right. My father, who was a World War II liberator bomber, was on B-24 and flew way more missions than he needed to. He was a waist gunner and a radio man, and was over Germany at the end. And when my husband and I were going to give talks in Germany, and he said, "Oh, you're going to Hamburg? You're flying to Hamburg? I can tell you where all the ball bearing factories were." I was like, "Okay, where was the important part of that?" Mm-hmm. But at the end of his life, he was funny. He had a bad ending. I mean, he had Parkinson's, he had epilepsy, he had cancer. And I remember taking him to the hospital in New York. My brother did most of the care, but I would go down a couple of times a week. At one point, my brother was out of town. I took my old man to NYU, caring for him. And I said, "So, Mr. Barreca, what brings you here?" And he said, "Doc, you can see, I have cancer, I have epilepsy, I have Parkinson's. It's a trifecta. It's not enough." And I said, "I think he also broke his arm. He tried to open the window." But it was like, and then this was, again, the end of his life, that he could have been miserable. He could have spent all of his time thinking about the tragedy, the loss of my mother at a young age, all the rest of it. He gets into an ambulance. The ambulance drivers in New York, the emergency guys, people have to ask, "What hospital? Where are we going?" Right? You have to say your hospital. And it was a woman who was the emergency EMT at that point. And he said, she said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "There's a club on 92nd Street. I think you'd like." And he says, they're taking him to the house. He's flirting with the woman who's strapping him into the gurney so he won't slide off of it. "There's a club on 92nd Street. I think you'd like." And this is what, again, it didn't make him last longer, but it made everybody happier. Yeah. And it was stuff that came right. I mean, when Snow White became a bestseller, it was on the bestseller list in Canada for 24 weeks or 28 weeks or something. And I said, "Dad, Snow White made it to the bestseller list in Canada." He said, "Well, it's got snow in the title, honey." He said, "The Canadians are very literal people." And I'm like, my girlfriends bought me balloon bouquets. I mean, they were celebrating. My father's like, "Hey, it's got snow in the title. What do you want?"
We can use humor. We can use humor about serious things.
Absolutely.
I mean, you give talks often after not so good things happen for sexual harassment and other related legal things to corporations.
Right.
And you're using comedy to help them actually digest, take in, and internalize the very important and serious content.
And that's absolutely right. And they don't know what to do. I mean, when I go in and say that, the first thing people have to understand, that harass is one word. And it takes people, like the guys in the back are like writing it out with their Mont Blanc pens.
Just like the guys at Dartmouth. They just don't get, they don't get good stuff.
Because nobody's made them. Where the poor are funnier than the rich. That's a whole other discussion. But the poor are funnier than the rich. Right? Because they have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to. You find ways. If you got 18 people sharing one toilet in a tenement, you're going to find ways to be funny about it. Yeah. You're going to find ways that are going to be different from just accepting the preciousness and the privilege, and the idea of entitlement is not very funny. It's funny to make fun of that. That's why, it's the funny girl that is ridiculing, is parodying, is putting out the satire about those things that we expect of beautiful women. It's Mel Brooks who's coming at it from, from his particular angle with the producers. It's the people who are outside the positions of power. It's the fool in the court that gets to tell the truth.
Right.
And that gets to tell the truth. Again, we're going back to fast, gets to tell the truth fast without a 3-hour explanation.
Yes.
I mean, so that going back to learning how to speak fast at college, when guys would go, when all grandfathers went here, there were no women. And I learned to say, when your grandfathers went here, there were no indoor lights. Sometimes things get better. And
Right.
that was different. I mean, because
Right.
when I went into a 2-hour conversation about the need for coeducation, nobody listened. But I said, when your grandfathers went here, there were no indoor lights. It was like watching a Labrador catch a Frisbee. It's like they laughed before
Hmm.
they realized what they were laughing at. And if you get somebody to laugh, that
Hmm.
means they understood your point.
Yes.
That moment, even if they
Yes.
don't, they will disagree with the theory behind it. But for that moment, if you got them to laugh, they meant they got it and
Mm.
you got them.
Yeah.
So you can make a point within humor. It's like putting a little hamburger around a pill for a dog to swallow it. It's
Exactly.
like you get, they
Yeah.
took it in. They can resent it later, but they got it. If they didn't laugh, you can give them a pass. But if they laughed, that means they understood.
As we wind down, I've been trying to consolidate my questions, so I think this is a two-parter here.
Okay,
We'll
great.
see what comes out.
Okay.
As where we are now in time, in history, what do you think what do you want women to be thinking about?
Um,
And this is the kicker. And
okay.
how can men help?
I like the second part of that question.
Mhm.
And where you can carry in your head what you don't need to carry on your back. That's an old Italian
Mm.
statement. So why are you going to
Mhm.
get an education? So I can carry it on
Mhm.
my head, so I don't have to carry it on my back.
Mm.
And not that there's anything wrong with carrying on your back if that's what you choose to do, right? Um, but that there are choices, and that rights are not something that anybody will let you keep unless you fight for them. And that's true. That's always been true in history. And that if you get too used to what you consider just how things are, and I get to do this, I get to make choices, I get to get an education, I get to vote, I get to decide what kind of work I want to do, I get to decide what books I want to read, I get to decide what kind of food I want to eat, I get to decide whether or not I leave the state, leave the country, have a dual passport, allow my children to go to school, decide whether or not to have children, whether it's my body and my choice or it's somebody else's choice. That these have always been questions, and the
Mhm.
fact that they can be shrugged off too easily as saying, "Well, these are established rights." It's like, no, rights are things that need protection and need to be discussed and not taken for granted. The right for the freedom of worship, the right to pursue happiness. I mean, these are all the things that, um, again, we need to keep looking at. Uh, and I worry. I don't have so much. I have friends who do. I don't have so much a fear that the best in us won't triumph. I really believe that,
Mhm.
and I believe it around the world, that we can um, make things work. And I think that that history takes is sort of title that goes out and comes in. And but I believe that um, that the idea of defending what's important means being aware of what's important and what's at stake. One of the things about not just reading everything online, but having a book with an ISBN number,
Mhm.
having
Right.
something that somebody can go back to
Mhm.
and read,
Mm.
and archives, and know that this is not the first time this is happening. This
Mhm.
is not the first time people have thought about this. Let's put this into a larger conversation that's been going on for 10,000 years
Mhm.
so that we can stop ourselves from panicking, or that we could start to get really nervous because the last three times this happened was
Right.
the collapse of different kinds of civilizations.
Right.
So maybe these are things that we should be looking at as opposed to going, oh, there's a drum. We should look at, oh, there's the overturning of R.V. Wade. oh, so things
Yeah.
get lost if there are
Mhm.
shiny lights
Right.
versus the stuff that doesn't go fast enough
Right.
and so
So be
loses our
informed.
attention.
Be informed
And
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 put
understand
things in context. Put things in context.
and know the sources of your information.
Mhm.
Why is somebody key bono? Who's profiting? Why does somebody want you? What do they want? You want, I want people. We hope that people who listen and talk and consider ideas will have other ideas about them. Not
Mhm.
that they're going to go, okay, we're done. Now I know everything I know about this. Right?
So all of that applies to the male species, but I also would like your wisdom for us males of how we can help with the whole movement, right? With everything we're talking about and what we need to be very aware of and mindful and intentional about.
Wow. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question in my entire life. Um, I think by just actually liking women more.
We have a lot of work to do. I
Yeah.
mean, we really do stand at a crossroads with many things right now, and we all can be part of the solution, right?
I
And I,
believe
yeah,
it. I
yeah,
really do. And I, I grieve for the idea of what I saw. And I don't think it's just like an old lady nostalgia. I saw things as more promising both for women and men, let's say 15 years ago. And I see things closing down now. And I think that it's more informed by um, a sense of not even individual narcissism, but sort of collective narcissism, this tribal, again, militia, small town gossip, pre Enlightenment look at the world,
mm-hmm,
where you're
mm-hmm,
really just listening to the people you've already listened to, and you're not
mm-hmm,
able to accept
mm-hmm,
other voices.
yeah,
So that is what. So just listening, learning how to hear voices that are unfamiliar and that
yes,
women have a different accent than men. So it's as much
mm-hmm,
an unfamiliar voice.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Listen and I would say listen and ask. Also, elicit
mhm,
information that you can then listen to,
right.
right?
And respond to, and
And
then
respond
act
to,
on, right?
and
And
don't dismiss.
right.
Don't dismiss. Hmm.
And and pass along so that it becomes what's understood to be wise.
Hmm.
And that wisdom should be not just the grabby, greedy sort of sense of accumulated strength,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
something that has to be earned.
Yeah.
So
When
yes,
I,
sure.
okay, that's a lot. I mean, it's it's it sounds actually simple, and it is. It's not simple. I mean, literally, for men to listen more, to respect more, to increase their awareness, to be okay with vulnerability and powerlessness and less thanness, right? These are all things that are for whole other conversations, as why all of this is the way it is. But regardless of it being the way it is, I agree with you in these times where there is a lot of fear that we must have hope, and with the hope is action, and that for everyone to know that you do something a little different. You show some kindness, you show some compassion. You lean into someone you disagree with. You try to understand more when you don't understand. It's incremental. It's incremental and massive at the same time.
I like the when you try to understand more when you don't understand as a wonderful line, as opposed to like, I don't understand this, I'm leaving the room.
not easy to do,
No.
actually. It's not easy to do.
Not at all. But
Yeah.
I'd love to continue with the conversation. I'd
Yes.
love to
Yes.
keep
Yeah.
going. It's really such a treat. You're so smart.
Yeah.
You're so
Yeah.
good. I really appreciate it.
Gina, thank you.
Pleasure.
There's just so many directions to go. There's so much to your life and to your impact, and well, maybe there'll be another conversation. And I
Good.
just want to again appreciate you for the ripple effects that you have had on your students, your colleagues. Like everywhere you go, you end up collecting familial members, lifetime familial members, which is a tribute to who you are and apparently what you're here to do.
Thank you. That's a very lovely thing to hear. I'll carry those words with me.
Tell everyone where they not only this book's coming out very soon, but you have all of your other work as well.
Thank you. And people can come to my website, which is ginabarreca.com, all one word, GinaBarreca. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram because our friend Laura makes sure that I am. I'm doing these things and I'm easy to find and I answer my email and I would love to. And I post a number of things on Facebook and I get into long conversations on Facebook. So I'm delighted to do that. And I'm really always happy to have a conversation with you, Dr. Dan. Okay. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Please send this on to everyone you think will benefit, and that is just about everyone that you know from my vantage point. Thank you for being a part of this wonderful community. We appreciate your reviews, your endorsements, and your support. Now get out there and make it a great one. This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Uplifting Folk by Awesome Music. Artwork by Kelly Dwyer. Follow us on social media at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, visit drdanpeters.com.